Okay, let's rig a flour sack. This will be our first step into more advanced rigging. What we did for the ball, that was a good start for the ball, feather, and brick. But this is going to be hardcore. Let's make a skeleton and give it controls. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a skeleton or a flour sack itself. So let's go ahead and make a cube. Bring up my channel box. I'll zero him out. Alright, I'm just going to do this fast because this isn't a modeling class. This is a animation class. So I'm going to make him a little bit big, make him a little bit skinny, make him tall. Here we go. Alright, so with this, I'm just going to do some insert edge loops. I'll put one right down the center. Alright, put one for his shoulders right here. We'll make one for his chest. We'll make one for his hips. And we'll just duplicate the other side over for right now for when we get to it. So let's go in and just scale these down. Alright, great. And we'll scale these in. We'll delete this side. We'll freeze and reset transformations. Alright, before I do that, I'm going to make sure my flour sack is looking okay. Alright, now I'm going to insert an edge loop right down this side of him. And I'm going to kind of make him a little bit more 3D. I'm going to snap these verts over to the center of the grid. So I'm going to select my mesh now. I want to make sure he's on the ground. Okay. I like to go press 3 on my keyboard and make sure he's nice and smooth. Alright, great. So we'll place him like so, right there. Freeze transformations, reset transformations, and we'll go to our polygons group and we'll do a mesh mirror geometry. Let's make sure we're mirroring over to the negative X side of things. And now we have a flour sack that, for all intents and purposes, will work just fine. Alright, I'm going to give him a belly. I'm going to pull this vert out and these two right here. Alright, I got a little belly on my sack now. Perfect. Alright, so with my sack made, we can get started with our rigging. So I'm going to go to my outliner and call this sack mesh 001 and give him a group. Create layer from selected, sack lay, and we're just going to lock this guy out. We don't want to touch the model anymore. We want to start making our skeleton. And in this video, we'll just make the legs, okay? So what we're going to do to make the legs, let's go to our front view. Alright, with the front view of my model ready to go, I'm going to first make a little pelvis, or the center of my skeleton. So let's go to the animation layer right here. This brings up my skeleton menu. I select my joint tool, and let's just put my pelvis right here in the middle of my sack. Alright, I'm going to hit enter, and now I have a pelvis bone. If we open my outliner, we can see what that looks like. It's called joint 1. Let's call this pelvis JT for joint 001. And let's make sure he's exactly in the center of our grid. So let's just freeze our transformations and reset them. Alright, that did nothing. You can't freeze or reset transformation of joints. Alright, so you're just going to have to live with these messy numbers up here. But what I can do is I can zero out my translate X, and I'm going to keep my translate Y where it is because I like the position of the up and down right here. So let's create our first left leg over here. So I create my joint. So I go to skeleton, joint, and we're going to make 3 joints right now. We're going to make a hip bone, we're going to make a knee, and we're going to make a little foot here, if Maya will catch up to me. and we're going to press enter. Let's take time now in our outliner to name them. So this is how we'll name them. We'll call this hip, LFT for left, or you can just spell out left. JT for joint, 001. And let's just do this for the rest. Let's call this knee, LFT, JT for joint, 001. And of course, foot, left, JT, 001. It's important to call our legs with the left right here because this is the left side of our skeleton. What we'll end up doing is mirroring our skeleton across to our right side here. So we got to make sure we have left somewhere in the name. I'll show how that comes in handy in a second. So if we go into perspective view, I now see I have a floating little joint right here. I don't want to connect my leg to my joint quite yet, but you know what, let's go ahead and just do that. I guess that'll be fine. So I'll select my hip left joint, and I'll middle mouse button click and drag in my outliner and set him right on top of my pelvis. So now I have pelvis, hip, knee, foot. And as you can see, now I have a little cylinder or cone connecting my hip to my pelvis right here. Alright, that's great. But we're not quite there yet. I need to position this just a little bit more. I need to have my knee out in front of my foot because that's just how knees work. You know, when a human's at standing position, his knee is out just a little bit more than his foot. So we'll just take our hip left and we'll just rotate it just slightly, like so, forward. And then I'm going to take my knee left joint and just rotate him back so I can put my foot right where it needs to be. Alright, so I got my foot and leg skeleton completely made. Now it's time to start spicing it up a little bit. Alright, great. So what we got to do now is we got to make a IK handle. Let's go over IK and FK real quick. FK stands for forward kinematics. It's a common term when it comes to rigging. Forward kinematics simply states if I rotate one joint, if I rotate my hip, my knee and foot will follow. Alright, so undo that. Same thing, if I rotate my knee, my foot will follow, but now my hip stays in place. That is forward kinematics. It basically describes how your joints move with each other in relation to each other. IK is a little bit different. And you'll see that in a second whenever we create our IK effector, our IK handle. So to do that, it's going to get a little bit more technical, a new tool that you're not used to seeing, but if we follow along closely, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay? Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create an IK handle, an inverse kinematics angle. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Skeleton, IK handle tool, but just don't click on it. Let's go to our extra options button right here, the little square right here, and that brings up our tool settings for our IK. So the default settings on our IK look something like this. So everybody go ahead and reset the tool to make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to change two things here. This is very important. We're going to change IKSC to IKRP. This is going to help us affect the rotation of our knee joint to make sure that it rotates and is oriented in the right position. The next thing we're going to do, and the last thing in this little menu, is we're going to click sticky. Okay, so make sure it's IKRP and make sure sticky is checked. Very important that you do both of these things, otherwise it will not work correctly. So now you'll notice that with my inverse kinematic handle tool active, I now have a crosshair instead of a cursor. So what we're going to do is we're going to click my hip bone, and then we're going to click my foot bone. And now I get this crazy new handle, and let's explain what we're looking at right now. So I'm going to just X this out. We'll bring up my outliner, and we have a few new things on my outliner here. I have an IK handle and I have an effector. The IK handle is the most important thing we've created in our outliner right now. And in fact, let's call it foot left IK handle 001. This foot IK handle serves a really cool purpose. Okay, look what happens when I grab this little crazy wired frame looking handle right here. Look what happens when I move it around. Now my knee scrunches up. Alright? But it's not in the best of condition right now. Because as you can see, instead of my knee going forward, it's now curving inward. And that's not what we want to do, okay? So we have to rotate this little white triangle right here so that it's pointing forward so we can get our knee pointing in the right direction too. So let's go to our channel box up here, and I'm going to scroll down until I find my twist right here. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to click twist, so the twist is highlighted, and then I'm going to middle mouse button click in the viewport right here. With my middle mouse button clicked, I can now drag, and look what happens to my knee and the little white pyramid. It's rotating. And what we're going to do is we're going to place it so that my knee is back in the same spot it needs to be. And you can even go in here in your channel box, and I'm just going to make mine -90, and now my knee is in the exact same spot that I need it, and now my IK handle should function pretty nicely. So when I bring up my knee goes forward now, and it looks like I'm doing some good, natural deformation of my skeleton. Alright? It's important to note that if you're testing out these little handles and stuff and moving your joints around, make sure that after you're done testing, you undo so we can put our joint back where it needs to be. Because remember, they're not zeroed out. We can't get them in the right position again because our channel box cannot be frozen. So make sure that if you're testing this around, you undo the movements, and so we can get our joints back where they originally were. Alright, great. So I have a cool new leg system built where it's looking like it's almost like a natural walk kind of motion. Let's hide my sack and see what's happening with my leg right now. If I move around my handle, doesn't that look like a leg walking? Yeah, pretty neat. So I'm going to undo that, get my joints back where their original position was, and I'm ready to I'm ready to keep working. Alright, so with my leg created, I now need to mirror over to my right side. And it's a pretty easy process here, especially since we named our joints so precisely. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my hip bone now. That's the beginning of the left side of my leg joint chain, right? My left hip. So with my left hip selected, I'm going to go to skeleton and go to mirror joint right here. Let's select our extra options box right here, and let's do a few things. I'm going to reset the settings. So everybody reset your settings to make sure we're on the same page. What we're going to do now is we're going to select mirror across the YZ axis, and now we're going to search for the word left and replace it with the word right. Leave behavior where it's at, and we're ready to rock and roll. When I hit apply, look what happens. I get a whole new set of joints here. I get a new IK handle. And now if we look in our outliner, let's see what we get. So I'm going to collapse a few things. I now have a foot right IK handle, which is this guy. And now I have a hip right joint chain. Hip right, knee right, foot right. Pretty cool, huh? But there's something you got to notice. Our little white triangle here and our knee are pointing inwards now. So we got to change that twist one more time. So I'm going to select this new IK handle for my right foot. I just duplicated across. I'm going to go to twist. I'm going to click, left click twist. And then in my viewport, anywhere in here, I'm going to middle mouse button click and just drag until my knee is pointing in the right direction again. And I think 90 degrees should about do it. Alright, cool. So now I have my knees pointing in the right direction, and for all intents and purposes, my advanced leg rig is ready to start rocking and rolling. But the first thing we got to do before we move on to the rest of the body, I got to make some really fancy controls, or a steering wheel for my legs, if you will, because I don't want to animate on these little IK handles here. That's a no-no, a big no-no. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some circles. All right, just like we did for our ball, feather, and brick, we're going to create some handles so we can animate even more efficiently. So let's go to Create, NURBS Primitives, and let's just make a circle. All right, I'm going to draw out a circle in the middle, bottom of my grid here, and we're going to do a few things. You got to be very precise and careful here. There's no room for messing something up too much in the rigging process. So I'm going to put my circle right at the bottom of my foot here. That'll be a pretty good tell for saying, hey, this is my foot. If I grab this, I can start moving my foot around and I'll be happy. So position this right where you want it. You know, it could be right there. And we got to do a few things now to make sure our control will work right. First, we got to name it. So I'm going to call this foot left control 001. This is my foot control. Alright, so we got it named. Next, we're going to freeze our transformations. Okay, so we're going to go to Modify, Freeze. And since we can't freeze the positions or transformations of my joints, we're going to use this control to be able to freeze my transformations here. So it kind of gets around that, well, I can't freeze the joint, so what am I going to do if I ever want to go back to my original pose? Well, you're only going to be animating these handles. So if these are zeroed out, you'll always be able to go back to your original pose for your model. Okay, great. But we're not quite done yet. We need to do two more things now. I'm going to go to wireframe mode, or in fact, I'm just going to hide my flour sack altogether. I need to do one more thing, or two more things rather, to get this working right. Notice where the pivot point for my circle is. It's right underneath my foot joint right here, right? I don't like that. That's not a good practice. For the most part, rule of thumb, if you make these nice curved control handles for your rig, you're going to want to make sure that the pivot point lies directly on your joint. So how do you do that? Well, if you snap it to your foot joint, now my transformations are all messed up and I don't have my foot control in the place I want it. Well, I'm on a PC right now, and then I think it might be the same for Mac, but I know if I press Insert on the PC, my arrow keys now turn into these weird straight lines. Okay? And look what happens whenever I hold down V on my keyboard, okay, and then snap to my joint. My circle stays in the same place, my values are still zeroed out, and if I press Insert again, now my arrow keys are right in the middle of this joint, and my control isn't messed with, and I can now rotate from my joint. So you want to make sure that your pivot point is right in the center of your bone for whatever part you're trying to control with your handles. And we'll do that a few more times throughout this process, okay? In fact, let's just go ahead and review how to do that again, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually reset these transformations and do a duplicate special just so I can get that same foot control exactly in the same place on the left or the right side of my model here. Okay? So with that done, now we're going to go in and reset or freeze our transformations one more time just to make sure. Okay? And we're going to do that same process again. I'm going to press Insert or whatever the shortcut key is for the Mac. You'll know you're in it whenever your arrows or whatever turn into these straight lines. I'm going to hold down the V key, V as in vector or Victor. The little cursor turns into a circle, and then I can snap it right to my joints. Do the same thing here. Press Insert, snap to my joint. Alright, now my foot controls are set up perfectly. I need to go in here and rename this new foot control I made. Call it right control 001. And we're ready to begin the last process of creating the rig for my legs. Okay, so we've talked about skeletons and joints. We've talked about IK and FK, basically how the joints move for us. And we've talked about how we can make some nice control curves for our rig. Now we're going to talk about constraints. All right, this is the fourth fundamental tenet of rigging that we're going to be discussing today. Constraints are really nice because right now there's nothing connecting my foot to my control handle. See, when I move my control handle, my foot does not follow. Well, with a parent constraint, that'll fix that problem. So constraints and a parent constraint, it works like this. All right. So let's pretend that this circle is a proud father, and about 2 years ago, it and Miss Curve gave birth to a nice new child called IK Handle. And he's a proud father, and you know what? IK Handle loves the hell out of his dad, his parent. Even so much so that whenever his parent moves around, the child follows him wherever he goes. So, a parent constraint is named such that the child follows the parent absolutely around like a shadow. So, to set one up, I'm going to grab my parent first. Performance issues. I'll just X out of that. I'll grab my parent first, and then I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and grab my child. Let's go over that again. I'm going to grab my control curve because remember Mr. Control, he's the proud parent. Then I'm going to hold down Control or Shift on my keyboard and select little IK Handle Junior guy because he's going to be Control Handle's child. Very important on which way or in which order you select this to make the constraint work right. So let's select our parent and let's select our IK handle for the child. So now we're going to go to constrain and see where it says parent. We're going to click the extra options box. We're going to make sure reset settings, everything's at reset value, and we're going to add it. Alright, so that does one thing to our left IK handle. It makes this little exclamation mark called left IK handle parent constraint. So effectively, anytime we grab my parent control handle now, little IK handle is just going to follow him just around everywhere, and it's just a cute little precious little thing we have going on. Hey little dad, let me follow you around. You're a circle. I love you. Alright, hopefully that stupid story will stick in your head and you'll understand parent constraints a little bit more. So let's do the same thing. Miss Circle over here, they had another little child. So now we need a parent little child to Miss Circle the parent. Alright, I'll quit using that metaphor, I promise. No more of that nonsense. So, let's talk more like CG artists. So we're going to select our control curve for the parent. We're going to select our IK handle for the right side as our child. We'll use constrain, parent, and now right side is now constrained. And now anytime you move your control curve, your foot will follow. Alright, great. So that is one of the most advanced, well, not one of the most advanced, but if you're really getting into hardcore rigging, creating an IK system for your feet is very important. So remember whenever I told us that we needed to make the IK handles sticky, have that sticky box checked over here. So remember this one, skeleton IK handle tool, sticky. I'll tell you why we check sticky. So I'm going to grab my pelvis right here, and look what happens whenever I move my pelvis. My rig automatically squats with it. And when I jump, it extends out and then jumps up with it. So you can imagine the kind of benefits we're going to have with this. Because now, instead of having to animate the pelvis, then animate the hip, then the knee, then the foot, to make sure that everything follows along with it, the IK system does it for us. So two powerful things in one little tool, the IK handle. So that's great. So let's do an overview of what we got so far and clean up our outliner a little bit, okay? We have a left control, a right control. We have a foot left K and a foot right IK. And we have a pelvis. And if I expand my pelvis, I should have a hip left and hip right underneath. And of course, under those are all the rest of your bones. And these IK effectors, don't worry about those. Those are grayed out for a reason. They're just there for different purposes that we're not going to use right now. So that's definitely normal if you see effector 1. That's a good sign. So these IK handles are wigging me out. I don't like them just floating around. So I'm going to select both of them in my outliner. So I'm going to select one, hold down Control, and select the other. And let's just group them together to make sure they're organized. So I'm going to go to Edit with both of them selected. I'm going to go to Edit, Group, and let's call this group Effectors. Group 001. So that'll get my IK handles out of the way and into their own little group right here. Let's hold off on grouping anything else for right now. That'll be one of the last steps we take in this whole journey of rigging. So in the next chapter, we're going to finish this guy's upper body. We're going to make skeleton points for his chest, for his shoulders and hands, and we're going to give them controls as well. We're going to use parent constraints to make sure those controls affect the skeleton, and we're also going to bind our skeleton to Mr. Sack right here. And then we'll organize our outliner and we'll call it a day, and we'll have an awesome new rig, a new toy to play with, and we'll be able to animate our flour sack walking around being a goofball. Alright, thanks guys.